to have Silva is the Director of Engagement with YOUnify. Pedro, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good, man. All things considered.
All things considered. And well, yeah, we are in a stressful situation in this country right now, but you know what? It's activists, it's people that are engaging that actually makes a difference. First of all, tell us a little bit about what YOUnify does.
So Unify is in a space that we lovingly call bridging, which is basically bringing people together across differences. And we kind of have the mission of minimizing toxic polarization as well as bridging cultural divides of every kind, but with the aim of solving the problems that are very solvable in our country. And we kind of come from the mindset that we have everything we need to flourish, to thrive, and to create systems that positively impact our communities. It's just getting past some of those hurdles. And some of those hurdles are polarization, misunderstanding of different cultural norms, and things like that. So we create containers, whether it's through using length conversation trainings and such, or JODI, which stands for Justice, Opportunity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity, hosting films, all sorts of different interventions that bring people together to look at the values that inspire and motivate people, and then try to help create situations where they can look at how can we solve problems that a lot of times are across differences, like people are experiencing similar problems, and then they just have challenges in terms of creating solutions because they're too busy focusing on the divides or the things that seem to divide them.
It's hard not to think about the divide, right? When there are people in the positions of power who selectively are trying to do that. I have some reasons why I think they do, but let's use an example as critical race theory, which supposedly
Mm.
isn't taught in high school or in these other places, but somehow that's become a new meme that really keeps people apart because folks don't want this critical race theory taught. How do you get around the people in power attempting to put that on to the community, if you will, while you are at the same time trying to tell these folks you need to try to get along? I mean, it's almost you're fighting the powers, the people with power that's pushing these particular memes.
Well, we kind of come from the position that the individual who is kind of building the community actually has more power than they think that they have to affect positive change through organizing and collective action. And the challenge is of helping people realize that they have the power that they don't think they have. Usually people in a lot of systems, they look to someone and they say, okay, that is the person that has the power. And so I, being a powerless person, have to align myself with power to keep myself safe or to provide for my family or whatever the thing is that most human beings have in common. And we try to show people you actually have more power than you think you do. And from a place of power, you can actually build relationships. Because people, the reason why I think a lot of people don't build the relationships across perceived differences is because of fear, and fear of not having power, fear of being left behind, fear of not being able to take care of their family. And so they look to some leader that tells them, I see your problems, I see your challenges, and I can save you. And then they say, okay, I'm going to trust that you can do that because I feel powerless to do it myself. But if you actually can connect with other people who have similar values, they want to provide for their children, they want to be able to pay their bills, they want to be able to imagine having a future, and you put them with other people and go, oh, what? We have similar values. Hold on. We are both the strings are being pulled by people who seem to have power, or we believe them to have power, but there's more power in our interrelating and co-creating than there is in this system that's struggling to try to maintain a semblance of power. That's kind of our approach. And so we try to help people recognize the power that's already inherent in them, and then expand on that through organizing collective action and working together across differences to learn to see multiple perspectives on the same problem, and being able to do something together to solve these challenges that most people agree on. A lot of the issues you see is like 70% of people agree, and yet we see this polarization. Is like, how is that possible? It's because people feel powerless, and that's where we kind of engage at that level.
Now that is commendable, the work that you're doing. My biggest question with these types of organizations is, how do you scale? I can see these organizations working well in a suburban area. I can see them working well in places where people have the time to have thought processes and going to meetings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What happens in these areas where people are living on top of each other and just trying to make it through the day? What kind of procedural fixes is there for that sort of a environment?
I mean, I think that's probably a valid criticism of any kind of work that's in this spaces, because a lot of people don't have the time or the resources, at least at this present time, to be able to, like you said, attend meetings and things like that. But there are ways, and just like if you grew up poor, like I grew up poor, there are natural, like inherent ways that people organize to be able to survive in those conditions. And I think that what we see in those environments where people have rent parties and do things like run car washes or sell dinners to help people pay for their food, or I mean, pay for their rent and things like that, is that there's already an inherent wisdom in community to be able to work together to solve problems. But what we've done is we've forgotten that we do have power. And so we don't lean into our neighbors. We have bought into the illusion that we can do things all on our own. And so as we've started to buy into that, we end up being victim to the propaganda that's out there that tells them that we're powerless. And so I think that fundamentally, it's reminding people of the wisdom of community that has already existed within us for generations, and being able to maximize that wisdom. So even in a poor environment, say they wanted to build a garden in their community, and we've seen people do it, where a person will say, hey, you know what, we need some fresh food in this community, and it's a food desert out here. But some people decide, hey, we're going to get together, we're going to collectivize, we're going to make this little garden. And then you see a little bit of a success. And then you start to realize that you can do these things among yourself. Then it changes the way you approach power. Even you take, for example, I was a pastor for 10 years, right?
Right.
So there's certain situations where a person says like, oh, I feel powerless. Like we do a thing called power mapping, and it shows people that they actually have more connections and more relationships than they think they have, and that those things can be leveraged. So say someone wants something to happen in their community, but they say, well, who am I? By myself. Well, maybe by yourself you don't feel like you're anyone. But then you say, well, do you belong to a church? Yeah, I belong to a church. Okay, how many people in your church have had that same concern or that same issue? And then you connect with those people and say, okay, how many people in faith communities in general is your church connected to another one? Yes. How many people in faith communities are having the same issue? Okay, let's discuss. It's that individualism that ends up making people diminish themselves instead of maximizing themselves collectively. And so we help people to see that. Then they can come to their same senator who won't listen to one person and say, hey, I represent 300 people who all see this. And then it changes the dynamic. But it's getting people to remember that they can lean on each other and build relationships. Like we're working with a group in Ohio right now. They're mostly retired people who have decided that they want to see there's a lot of things happening in Ohio right now. And
Oh
they're
yeah.
like, we want to see some changes happening. And they've decided, yeah, I might be retired and I might be a little older, but it's still an opportunity for me to affect positive change, because they've gone to some of the trainings and said, okay, well, if we try to do this, do you think it's possible? Yes, we do think it's possible. We just have to collectivize and lean in to making those kinds of positive changes. And we've seen people making those shifts, and that can be duplicable, because that's how societies have survived from the beginning of time. We just forgotten about it because we bought into, I can do everything by myself, which keeps people divided.
It's amazing that you are actually saying to break down our polarization to be able to enhance our power. The one thing that this country preaches, which is in fact individualism, is actually its biggest weakness. I
Absolutely.
mean, you're essentially saying that, and you take a look at when we go into the guns issue, you take a look at 80% of Americans want most of the good things about restricting guns. 80% of Americans plus,
Absolutely.
and we can't get it through. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, one of the words I that individual word, I break it down sometimes into in, divide, you all. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like you take an individual and they're operating from a place of division, right? And so you get a person, imagine we've watched the movies, Rambo or whatever kind of movie where one person goes in and somehow they're saving 50, 60, 300 people by themselves. That belief that that one person can be able to protect everyone, to save everyone. And it's a fantasy, right? But we have it in the culture of the American consciousness. So imagine a person, their value is I want my family to be safe. I want my family to be protected. Everybody agrees on that, you know? And I want to be able to, take care of my children. I want these things for my family. It comes down to that, right? And then they say, but if it's threatened, what can I do? Well, by myself, I can't do anything. I'm scared. But if I have this weapon, and each bullet, just imagine this, right? Each bullet represents from the consciousness of that person is like a multiplier. It's a force multiplier. And so they imagine themselves to have a multiplication of themselves through their weapons and their bullets and things like that. And it all comes down to a value of trying to protect and take care of their family. And they don't want anybody to harm their family, which is honorable value. But then that same individualism thinks I had to do it by myself. If you have a community that's working together to encourage one another, to support one another, to see kids that are struggling and that everybody sees it as their problem and that something that they can work together to solve, then the environment itself becomes safer. And you don't even need the fear of the threat that you're going to protect yourself from is diminished by community and by working together with people to solve problems. And that's the thing that I think with the guns you see is people think that they have to save everything and do everything by themselves. And they see guns as a force multiplier that builds their capacity to be able to do that thing. But in reality, I don't think it is that way.
Interestingly, right? We're talking. We just used guns as an example right there. But if we go ahead and migrate to the subway in New York, where Jordan Neely was murdered by Daniel Penny, because he came in with mental issues, shouting that he wanted some food, and he didn't care if he lived, he touched nobody, and this guy just choked him to death. And I want to break this into two pieces because there are two pieces here. The seeing a black body automatically as a weapon or as a danger, number one, even if that person is mentally ill. But number two, how you actually saw a particular sect try to defend Neely, try to make it that he just did what he needed to do or what he thought he needed to do. And they don't see that, they're unable to see that what you're saying is being in a black body gives others the right not to kill you, but to believe they are justified in killing you.
Well, I mean, I would say that this is a criticism to some degree of the education system, but I'll say the education system works in the sense that we have different narratives that we perpetuate in our system. Generally speaking, they all come down to again to the same value. I want to be safe. I want to be protected. I don't want my family to lose out. I want to be able to provide for my family. And anything that seems like it's a threat to that, then I have to keep it away from me. I have to distance myself from it. And but it also emerges from a unconscious, often sense of powerlessness, like that they actually feel powerless, but then it manifests as force, which is force and power are two different dynamics,
Right.
but we conflate force with power in our society. And so a person feels that their ability to force a situation is the same thing as power, which in fact is not. And even with the situation with black bodies, like yes, it's been weaponized. Like I've had people tell me, who people get to know me, I'm short. I'm like very short. I'm like 5'4". And I've had people say to me, I don't know why, but in my mind, you're 6 feet tall. Like generally speaking,
Right.
like a black person probably still sees me at 5'4". But I've had white people tell me, for some reason in my mind, every time I see you, I'm surprised that you're as short as you are, even though they've seen me. But in their mind, they experience me as bigger and stronger and have more physical power than I might actually have. That's a psychological thing that's been conditioned into the consciousness of many people in our society. And so, but it still keeps coming down to that same thing. It's like that person just is a terrified person. Like Penny, in my imagination, because obviously I'm not him, but I perceived that he was scared. And then he acted out of his fear and it's triggered a response. And then he tried to, in his mind, neutralize the threat, even though there may not have been an actual threat happening. But I've seen it time and time again that people will perceive a threat because they already are carrying that fear within them. So I've used this example for folks plenty of times. Say that you have a water hose in your garage, but you forgot to hang it up. You just throw it on the ground. You forget you throw it on the ground. You have a fear of snakes. You walk into the garage and you think, oh my God, it's a snake. You start chopping up the water
Oh,
hose immediately. And then you realize, like, oh my God, it's a water hose. It wasn't a snake, right? You have both simultaneously had the experience of coming in face to face with one of your fears, taking action on it, and it was very real until it wasn't, you know. And that's what happens, I think, a lot of times in encounters with folks. People encountering black bodies is it's been programmed into our society that we are a threat, and so people have that in their mind already, still running that tape of how do I protect myself, how do I keep my family safe, how do not realizing that we have the same concerns, we have the same values, we have the same things that, excuse me, that we're thinking about every single day. And that when another person puts their fear over someone else's reality, that's a dangerous cocktail, you know, and that's what we're perceiving a lot of times. And so, someone like Penny, in the mind of another person who's terrified, they'll say, he saved us, he was a hero. And without going too far into it, we have a very, I would say, a unhealthy, uh, I can't think of a good word, relationship with the hero dynamic.
yeah.
Like we want someone to be our hero, like so badly and when we decide someone's our hero, we have a strong commitment in society to that hero, even when we're witnessing the failings, because we just want someone to make us safe, you know. And it's going to be a while before humans, I think, get to a place where we start to really realize that a lot of the fears that we're running and operating are not actual reality, you know, because we've been running that tape for so long that it's pretty ubiquitous at this point. But I do think that interventions that cause people to have come an encounter with cognitive dissonance and being able to say, like, hold on, and feeling the discomfort of the thoughts that they are holding and their experience, and then encountering those, I think we're eventually going to be able to, I hope that we'll be able to, because I've seen people do it, to be able to come in contact with that awareness and go, like, I'm holding conflicting thoughts. I say I have this value, but I act in this way. And I do believe that there's going to be an increased value in congruency in humanity over time. Hopefully, it won't take a lot of hardship and despair and more of what we've been seeing to get to that point where we value congruency. I hope it doesn't, but I do believe that eventually congruency will win.
Now, one of the reasons I started doing this work and this type of journalism, this type of projects, is because I think we are purposefully being taught not to think critically. We are purposefully being taught all of these things to make people believe they're powerless. So I agree with you wholeheartedly there, because again, when we take a look at the dynamics in this country, and if you look at who are the people that really should justifiably be scared of others, the least person one would think that the person that should be most feared in this country are not the black men or whatever. After all, weren't these people allowed them? Well, I won't say allowed themselves, but weren't these people enslaved? Weren't these people allowed to have to suffer under Jim Crow? Weren't these people pretty much, for lack of a better term, mentally neutered? Who needs to fear who? And how do you, and look, there are genuinely folks that are scared of people who, let's say, look like me, genuinely. But it's because of what they were taught. But again, if being taught is not enough, right? And my question to you is as follows. It's what you're taught. Critical and how you're taught to think on your own. Critical thinking should have every American citizen not fearful of, let's say, we're talking black right now, let's say, not of black folks specifically, because again, the fear seemed to have been justifiably on the other, or should be justifiably on the other side. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I think that there's always been resistance of Black people in the context of subjugation, like when Black people were subjugated in the way that we were during slavery in this country. I do think there was always resistance and things like that, but people, because of those same values, I want to keep my family safe, I want to do these things, we held back some aspect of our own volition simply because, you know, we didn't want our children to be harmed or something like that. So I think that always is in place. So I don't think that we were necessarily neutered, but we were just being, because I know you use that term, but I think that it was more we were being strategic because we want our children to survive. I actually wrote a small little piece called "Do Children Owe Their Parents?" And the idea in it was talking about it was called "Do Children Owe Their Parents? A Black Perspective?" And it was the idea that in our context, in an American context, a lot of times the fear Black people were afraid for their children to be harmed by the white community, largely speaking, because they could, you know, touch our bodies or do whatever they wanted to do, and we seemingly couldn't say much. And so that informed a lot of the ways that we show up in the world. It informs the ways that our parents parented us sometimes, because sometimes our parents would want to make us more afraid of them than we would be of the police or of white people to keep us safe. So they would be like, I want you to be scared of me so when I tell you don't go down that neighborhood or don't go down that street, you won't, because you'll be afraid of what I'll do. And sometimes I might need to make you more scared than of me than you are of the other authorities, if you will. But then the downside of that is that as we started to gain different freedoms and things like that, some of us started being like, our forms of resistance were, you know, going against the system in any way we possibly can, because we know we watched our parents, their backs being broken under the system, watching our parents being, like in my case, my mom was like super intelligent woman. And I feel like my mom got basically bashed by this context in America and was not able to fully realize her potential, and, you know, kind of gave up over time because she was constantly being bashed and beat down. And so some of us, we look at that system and we say, okay, if this is what's going to happen, I'm not going to participate, or
Why
I'm going to do
bother?
whatever I can. Yeah, why bother? What? How can I get around it? And I do think that all of those expressions still come down to fear, a sense of powerlessness, and those sorts of things. I do, and but I also think
Let me
that
interrupt
because
you
it,
a second,
yeah,
there, Pedro, because when I just said why bother, I mean, this was just sort of I just got this out of what you were saying, and it was like, wow, people ask different demographics, different groups, why is it that you stay in that condition? Why don't you take yourself out of the condition? And the way you express that, why bother? If
hmm
there's a likelihood I'll be unsuccessful in getting there, why bother? That just kind of rang out. Sorry to interrupt you. That
yeah,
just
no.
rang out there.
I mean, I think a lot of people. I mean, for me, it still all comes down to fear, and no matter what it is. And people do come to that conclusion of why bother. And I do think that there's a fear. Like a lot of people I knew growing up, they were afraid of white people. Sometimes they would say that they were afraid out loud. Sometimes they would exaggerate the notion that they weren't afraid, and because they don't, who wants to say I'm afraid, who wants to walk around and be like I'm scared,
Exactly.
you know what I mean? And so, but it's the same issue that you see on either side, and it's the same values, it's the same things that they want to experience, and then that notion that it could be taken from them, or that they can try and fail, or it doesn't matter, like you build up your community and then someone burns it down, like all of these things, great on the consciousness of a person, and a community. But at the same time, I still personally submit to the notion that if it's emerging from a place of fear, then its illusion of power is impotent, And so I try my best in my own walk to be able to say, where is this coming from? And I've had encounters with people who have been fearful, but because if I can get myself to maintain a sense of awareness where I'm like, I see what's happening right now, and I see that this person is operating out of fear. Like I was at a thing out here when it was a few years ago. I can't remember to recall the man, but it happened in Texas, where I believe it happened in Texas, where it was a black man that was killing police officers,
Oh yeah.
because yeah. And so we
I
had a
remember.
vigil. Yeah, so we had a vigil both for the police officers and for the unarmed black people who had been killed. So some students held it. I wasn't responsible for
Right.
it, but I decided to show up to it. And a white man showed up, and whenever we read off a name of a black person, he would say something like "thug," this, that, and the
Oh,
other thing. And it was a candlelight vigil, and we were just saying names, and trying to hold like a neutral space. These college students were doing it, and he would say "thug" and "criminal," and he would just throw out these words, and then everybody would kind of look like, "Why is this guy doing this?" So then I said to him, I said, "Sir, can you please stop?" And he was like, "No." Basically, I'm gonna keep doing this. And I said to him, I said, "Sir, look, I know that you're afraid, and that's why you're doing this, but you don't need to be afraid." And then he said, "I'm not afraid. What are you going to say I'm afraid? These are thugs." And he kept saying his things. And I said, this event is both for police officers and for unarmed black people, because the same system is harming everyone. The
both
same
of them.
system is
Absolutely.
making everyone afraid of one another, and it's creating this. So, and I tried to explain to him, still, he said what he had to say. And then I said again, "Sir, I know you're afraid." And then at some point he said, "Why do you keep saying I'm afraid?" And then I said, "Because I've been afraid before too, and my face looked just like yours." And then as soon as I said it, he stopped. He didn't say anything else for the rest of the night. He got quiet. And then he sat down and talked to the students and started asking them questions, and they started talking to him back. Um,
Wow.
but the fear and the mutuality had to be acknowledged. And by, grace, I was able to hold my peace and be able to say to him, like, I know what fear looks like. I've been afraid. You are afraid. Stop doing what you're doing out of fear. and he stopped. I don't know what happened with the rest of his life, but he stopped that night and he was able to be quiet. And I think that a lot of people are operating under that fear, and they're like almost like a soda that's been shaken up, contents under pressure, and you open up a little bit and they like, but it's temporary though. Like even when you shake up
Right.
a soda, it flows for a little bit and then it settles down and it has less fizz, less potency and
Afterwards, yeah.
everything afterwards. But it's like we just don't have those containers that allow some of that stuff to spill over and to settle for people to then reflect, and so we try to create those containers and help people witness what's occurring inside of them when they have these encounters so that they own it. Because if I just tell them, all the time, and these are all the tips and stuff like that, it's not going to be sustainable. But if they can get to a point where they recognize it within themselves, then they can say like, oh, this is what's happening in me. And now I realize, now that I know that it's happening, just like in 12 steps, you realize you're powerless, and then you can invite in something that offers you some semblance of true power. Not exactly the same, but there's that you have to admit where you're coming from, that you feel powerless before you can actually do that. And I think that's the humility that a lot of us need to cultivate.
You nailed that. And you know what? Believe it or not, we're having so much time talking. We went a bit over time, but here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to close this session out. I think we got just where I'd hope with a sort of resolution. What I want to do the next time is to cover a few more directions. In other words, how can we, everything that you've spoken about, how can we actually make a difference starting now? That's the goal that I'd like to, because I think many a times not that you are talking in platitudes, not that I'm talking in platitudes, but many times we have all these grandiose ideas. And my question is, what's next? What do we do next? So the next time we talk, I want us to go ahead and talk about what are we going to do next? Because polarization is a real thing now, and it's being directed from above. How can we solve it from below?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll say there's no below. We're not below. We're like realizing that we're not below.
I am glad that you corrected me. That what I meant is I should say really from the masses, from the grassroots. Mm-hmm. That's what I should say. Anyway, give me a quick 15-second closer.
I believe, and I invite others to consider, that we are very much more powerful than we imagine ourselves to be. And that the power that we see in others is just a misguided reflection. That if we look within, we'll recognize that the things that we want from everyone else to provide for us, to give us, we can do it ourselves, not as individuals, but as a collective, as a community, brother to brother, sister to sister, friend to friend, neighbor to neighbor. It's through that we create the world that we know is possible.
Pedro Silva, Director of Engagement at YOUnify. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right, and we will be back.
Thank you.
Susan Pollard, along with Gabriela Diaz, put on an excellent memorial for the victims of the Uvalde shooting in Uvalde, Texas. It was a moving ceremony that paid homage to each of the deceased.
Those of you that don't know me, my name is Susan Pollard, and I'm the lead of our Northeast Houston Moms Demand Action group. Moms Demand Action works very locally, so we're the sort of Humboldt, Kingwood, New Caney, Porter area. And tonight, of course, we're here and coming together to remember the 19 children and 2 educators who were killed in a senseless gun violence incident 1 year ago at Robb Elementary. We're going to take some time to do a couple of different things tonight. We're going to talk about each of the victims of that senseless shooting. And in fact, I have information on each of them. And so when we get to that point, if people would like to read about one of these folks, would be able to do that. No pressure, you don't have to, but you're welcome to. We'll honor them and remember them. I'd like to introduce a longtime member of our group, Holly Krause.
Just some words to start our evening. There's a Broadway show called Rent, and in it the cast sings the words 525,600 minutes. How do you measure a life in the year? Tonight we stand with the Uvalde families who instead have to ask, how has it been a year? Do we measure it in the number of therapy sessions and nightmares that survivors have gone through? Do we measure it in the number of hugs missed, the number of texts and calls never made, the number of good nights and middle school schedules that should be filled out for the fall? Do we measure it in the number of art pieces not created, goals not scored, or jokes not told? Do we measure it in the Mother's Day cards and Father's Day cards not purchased this year? Do we measure it in movies not seen, graduations, birthday parties, and holidays with empty chairs? Do we measure it in the number of pictures added to the ofrendas? Tonight, we gather to support the Uvalde families and all those touched by the massacre at Robb Elementary 1 year ago today. We offer our thoughts and prayers, but we do not stop there. We honor with action. So many families from Uvalde have joined with families from Santa Fe, whose 5-year remembrance was last week, to fight tirelessly to keep anyone else from knowing the pain that they experience each and every day. We will continue to stand with them, but tonight we pause to remember each life taken and hold their loved ones in our hearts. Lives that will be forever marked by the before and after of this tragedy. Tonight we will read their names along with words shared by their loved ones.
At this point in the ceremony, the names of every single person that was murdered at that elementary school, a little bit about their story was read. I didn't tape that because these were individuals within the group that were reading these pieces, and for privacy reasons, I decided not to tape that. But here's the end of the program now.
Our family and our community remember all of the children and teachers whose lives were needlessly taken at Robb Elementary, and the families who will forever have an empty seat at the dinner table. And certainly our daughter's injuries and continued recovery, along with the trauma of all the children who survived, will forever be a reminder of the tragedy. We can and should honor the 21 lives taken with action, answers, and accountability. So, as we think about how do we measure a life and a death, and Christina's call to honor with action, I'd like to read a poem by Amanda Gorman that speaks to this. I know we may not feel hopeful or as hopeful now, but I think the work we do is important, and this poem, as many of her poems do, speak to hope, and I think that's important to hear while we're in the midst of this. I thought I'd awaken to a world in mourning, heavy clouds crowding, and society storming. But there's something different on this golden morning, something magical in the sunlight, wide and warming. While we might feel small, separate, and alone, our people have never been more closely tethered. The question isn't if we will weather this unknown, but how we will weather this unknown together. So on this meaningful morn, we mourn and we mend. Like the light, we can't be broken, even when we bend. We ignite, not in the light, but in the lack thereof. For it is in loss that we truly learn to love. In this chaos, we will discover clarity, and in suffering, we must find solidarity. For it's our grief that gives us our gratitude, shows us how to find hope if we ever lose it. So ensure that this ache wasn't endured in vain. Do not ignore the pain. Give it purpose. Use it. We'll observe how the burdens braved by humankind are also the moments that make us humans kind. Let every dawn find us courageous, brought closer, heeding the light before the fight is over. When this ends, we'll smile sweetly, finally seeing in testing times we become the best of beings. I think it is important to try and hold on to hope when we're in the midst of all that we're in the midst of right here. There have been 48 mass shootings in Texas since the shooting at Robb Elementary, and that's just Texas. But we want to think of these people that we spoke of, that we heard about, what they liked and what they loved and what they did. And so we want to honor all of those impacted by gun violence. Today and every day, we're going to stand with them. We're going to fight for them and for anybody who's been impacted by gun violence, because we know it's these families plus all of the children who were there, plus their families, and it's a ripple that spreads out. And we want to do our best for all of them so that no one else ever again has to endure this kind of unimaginable grief and pain. So thank you all for coming and for being here. I'm going to make a small plug. For those of you who are not members of our Moms Demand Action group, if that's something you're interested in, the quickest and easiest way is to text JOIN, JOIN, to 64433. That will get you into the mom system.
Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. After the current Democratic representative of the district chose to align herself with a Republican sect in the Texas legislature promoting hate against some in her district, she chose to become a willful ally to deny them the care they needed. The only way to ensure politicians support the will of the people is to challenge them in the primaries. A seat is owned by no one. It belongs to the people. In that light, community organizer and political activist Ashton P decided to put himself on the block again to serve the interests of the entire District 146. Welcome to Politics Done Right, Ashton. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am trying to get things done. I understand now that you have a great announcement you made this week.
Yeah. I actually announced last Friday that I will run against her, and I just put out a fundraising ask via Act Blue and raised about $10,000 in less than 3 days to run against Shawn Thierry.
I wonder why. I tell you what, let's get into that. Let's really get into this.
Well, first of all, let me tell you about who I am for those of you who are going to be watching and listening. My name is Ashton P. I'm the founder of Black Lives Matter Houston. I've been in Houston since I was 20 years old. I came with Katrina. I started the first Gay Straight Alliance in a high school in New Orleans, all Black high school, and I've been an activist ever since for Black lives and everybody for that matter. I'm not one of those all lives matter people, but I believe that allyship, like Shawn portrayed herself to be, Representative Thierry portrayed herself to be, is to be an ally to folks that you demand allyship from. So you can't say Black Lives Matter without being an ally to other people. So for supporting people who don't look like you, who might be AAPI or Latino, brown, Black and brown, right? And so the district, the reason why I say this is that this district is made up of so many different types of people. And her vote for SB 900, SB 14, and I think 2751, the will of people recognize that she's always been this person, that she's always been homophobic and anti-LGBTQ. She's been with the Houston Baptist Ministers Association alignment. If you're familiar with them, they voted.
Yes, I remember when we had
the equal rights ordinance,
exactly.
and we almost had an equal rights ordinance in 2014. In 2015, it was on the ballot. It got voted down, and Houston lost a lot of business because of the anti-LGBT rhetoric and the no men and women's restrooms BS that they were spouting. And here it is again. She voted to ban trans athletes from playing on the sports team with the gender identity that they're currently going by. They keep putting this as a groomer thing with the bill for gender affirming care, where Texas Children's Hospital just announced today that they're going to go ahead and stop doing the gender affirming care after their data got leaked to the Attorney General and the governor recently via someone who hasn't been identified yet, and basically putting people in danger. That's a violation of HIPAA. That's a violation of federal law, privacy laws, based on from what I understand, your medical bill of rights.
Right, absolutely.
Positive. And the medical bill of rights came from the protests that happened in 1986 that coined the phrase "nothing about us without us." HIV positive people are the people who came up with the medical bill of rights that you benefit from today, and that was violated. Those trans kids their rights were violated, their privacy rights were violated by that. And so you have people. I have a supporter who donated to me recently, who wouldn't take a refund back because she has to flee because her child was on that list of people who was leaked to the government, the state government. And they have to leave and go to another state because they think they're in danger. And so that's why I am running against Shawn Thierry, among other things. You're banning a book, adding to the anti-CRT critical race theory, which is a phrase that is non-existent, is not real, is made up, just like any other disinformation that's come from a big lie. And so now you've taken and you've done something, you claim...
Wait a minute. Are you telling me she voted against voted with that CRT crap as well?
No. What I said was that she voted the book, but the genderqueer ban. The book ban is in addition to what was already passed as far as the CRT bill. Because remember, the CRT bill is critical race theory that they claim was supposedly about making people feel guilty, but what it really was about erasing Black people, erasing brown people, AAPI people, and Latino people. When I say brown and Black people, because there are Black people in all of those groups, right? So when you think about it, most of the books that have been banned under under Florida law and under other states that have a similar bill that she voted for, under this book ban that was based on this book called Genderqueer, most of those books are written by Black people. This is a race issue, and she claims that she's being racially attacked by this, but her privilege and her bias as a cisgender straight woman who has light skin privilege and presents very culpable with white people is saying that it's basically throwing a rock from a rented glass house and saying, "Oh, look, you're attacking me. You're a vicious or vile activist coming at me because I voted this way. I'm only trying to protect the children." But the thing is if you voted for that book, you're not trying to protect the children. You're trying to hurt someone because you're taking care away.
Let me stop you there because I'm reading the state. She had a statement that she put out called "A Statement on Voting to Raise the Age to 18 for Gender Modification Treatments and Surgeries." And here's her major reason, and it's in her first paragraph. It says, "After hearing from constituents, listening to stakeholders, and reviewing the scientific data in this country and around the globe, I am assured that this position is rooted in sound policy, which supports the health, development, and overall well-being of minors." That's not a true statement.
No, that's not a true statement.
That statement also says stakeholders. The only stakeholders involved is the doctor, the person going through the personal doctor, the person going through the gender change prescriptions, etc., and the parents. Nobody else.
That's right.
Those are the and if you're going through these different, if you're the doctor giving the medical treatment, if you're the parent allowing the medical treatment, And if you are the kid receiving the medical treatment after going through the psychological rigor that you go through, those are the only stakeholders that matter.
Well, yeah, and that the scientific data that she's citing, she can look at the DSM-5, which is the federal government's database on mental health. I'm a sociology student. She's a law student. She should know better than to spout information that she couldn't verify herself. This is, as I stated before, this is based on misinformation, part of the big lie under Trump. It's the same thing as like it's all tied together, connect the dots. She's supporting an agenda under a Democratic banner by attacking the LGBTQ community when she doesn't realize that there are black LGBT people who live in her district who have voted for her repetitively, who she is hurting, who she did not contact as stakeholders, who have tried to reach out to her, who she has deliberately ignored, who she was called out on Twitter for ignoring, actually, as a matter of fact. And when I was talking to KXAN in Austin, I was told by the reporter that the manager said that, well, she was censored by the Maryland Democrats, but the Maryland Democrats has a lot of black membership. They just can't show up to the meetings, just like they can't show up to the Texas legislature. They go to work every day just like you and me. They can't choose between the bus fare, the light bill, and the dollar menu babysitter to go to the Texas legislature like most of the people who did not look like me or you showed up did. That's the reality of it. But the other thing is that same effort that they put forth in claiming racism and, it's just the white people trying to do that dog whistle BS about erasing the fact that black LGBT people actually exist, that homophobia, that transphobia, all that anti-LGBT madness can be squashed by one thing. Every state representative has an office that the state requires. If a constituent can't make it to the Texas Capitol, they are required by law to allow that constituent to testify remotely from the district office. She has a district office in the Sunnyside Multi-Service Center that she just opened, the new one. And so where was she at when those constituents needed to be notified? I get emails from all of the representatives all the time, a weekly email talking about what happened this week and that and the other, but who has time to check email when a lot of times they talk about rural people who don't have data and internet like that and are doing things on the phone just like that? This is the hood. I'm in Sunnyside. A lot of people use the internet from their phone. A lot of people have limited data on their phone. How are they going to know to do this? How are they going to know where to go? That's outreach. When was the last time she had a forum talking to constituents instead of stakeholders like Max Miller, who voted who was a part of the Houston Ministers pact that I was talking about earlier, to come out against the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance, which would have gave us some type of reform to talk about being discriminated against for being black, LGBT, or otherwise anything, woman, man, regardless of what we identified as some type of protection. We still don't have that protection to this day. And so almost 10 years later, in 2023, we don't have those protections, and she's still taking pictures to this day. Right now, in a picture, I just tweeted about it, like right before I got on with you, with Max Miller, the same bigots who were talking about to the LA Times they can't support same-sex marriage. Well, I was at the Supreme Court with Jim Obergefell when same-sex marriage was being heard. I was in the room when we found out that I had the right, and millions of people had the right to finally get married because of Obergefell v. Hodges. And so when people like her erase people like me, it sparks something in me to run, not just because of the LGBT issue, but because I want to know why we don't have sidewalks in this area, why we don't have fire hydrants.
Let me stop you right there. Hold on.
Like that.
It is important for people to see that if their representative, irrespective of party, is not doing what is necessary to serve the people, in fact, on the program today, that's what I try to tell people. They say that the government doesn't work for them. The government will work for you if you become the government as it was intended to be. And right now, what I see you doing, Mr. Woods, is that you're saying the government did not perform, your representative did not perform, and you put yourself up on the block to serve. So my next question and last question to you is, what will you do if elected into that position?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is what I'm going to do while I'm running is I'm going to go talk to the people. I'm going to have forums quarterly or how often as I can to talk to the people about what they need. I know that if I stepped outside right now, there's not a sidewalk that I could walk on from my front door off over here off of Scott and Reed where I live. Right, there are no fire hydrants. Those little blue hydrants that are around Houston, those are not fire hydrants. Those are water mains. There's streets that don't have stop signs or traffic lights, and people fly by, get hit. Those ditches you can fall into when it rains and get swept away because they're so deep. We need people to understand that there's an infrastructure issue, there's a public safety issue, not policing, but infrastructure as a public safety issue and a quality of life issue. If we give people the things that they need, like making sure that we work with the grocery stores that are in the area or the corner stores in the area to make sure, for example, the items that they're selling are not past expiration, and to make sure that we have facilities for people to get deodorant, tampons, different toiletries that they might need so that they can go to work and be fresh, right? Thinking about in this district about how I live right down the street from a high school, and I hear a police siren about 3 or 4 times every morning around the same time, around 5 a.m. And they just do it to intimidate people, right? And thinking about the idea that that same school down the street is a black school, which is something that I wanted to get into. The the idea that she wanted to push metal detectors, which is something that is something I'm against. I'm for the panic button bill, but think about it. That's the school to prison pipeline tie-in. Black schools with metal detectors, and then you want to arm teachers. And I wrote about that. I can send you the link to that too. Who's aiming at who? A teacher from Conroe or from Richmond, Texas, outside of Houston, could not have any relationship to any of the community or the children who go to that school. It could easily pull a gun and shoot a student because he looked at them the wrong way, right? And so we have to think about how we are coming from a place of privilege. If we are coming from a place of privilege, like I feel like she is, in context of her bills, so she's not thinking about how she promoted maternal mortality rates without talking about trans masculine people. When we're talking about people who exist as they are, you're taking their life chances away from them. You're wrecking the quality of life, and people are having to leave because of it. And I'm voting against her and running against her to let her know that she can't do that she cannot align with these Republicans and hurt people who look like her while saying Black Lives Matter. She didn't even show up to the Uvalde event that we did last year, and it's a year later, right?
Right.
So you think about how all these things work hand in hand. It's about the cruelty. It's the cruelty is the point. The education about the book bans is about erasing people, queer people, people of color, which both can be one and the same intersectionally, which is why I'm also running to teach that you can't separate Black from LGBTQ. You can't separate Latino from LGBTQ. You can't separate woman from LGBTQ. You can't separate man. You can't separate anybody because you got somebody in your family who's trans, gay, or bisexual. You got somebody who's Afro-Latino in your family. You got somebody who's Afro-Asian. We are everywhere. We are a diaspora, and we have to be respected in that way. And I'm running to make sure that all of the people in the district, whether they agree with me or not, are represented.
Ashton P. Wood, activist and community organizer. Thank you so kindly. And now candidate in District 146. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thank you for having me.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number 1, subscribe to our channel, and number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.